my phone. It's very bad signal.
If y'all came here, you wouldn't have to worry about a bad connection.
That's right. You tell them, Alex. I was just thinking the same thing.
Welcome, everyone. It's so great to see you again. Great to see all the wonderful smiles, the new faces. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So it's always great, and all the returning faces. Always wonderful to see you all. It's a great way to get into the middle of the week, ending Tuesdays with this. And so, first, I want to remind you that one of the reasons why we have the conversations that we just had, the sort of one-on-ones or small groups, is that part of developing spiritually is becoming part of a community. That there are things you learn in community that you will not learn on your own or through Barnes and Noble's Buddhism. The Buddhism that comes from just reading about it. And if you look around, and you may have noticed in your group, the people that are here are people who are growth-minded, who are self-reflective, who want to improve themselves and by extension the world. These are good people to have in your life. And so if you're looking for friends as an adult, which is always hard to do, this might be a good place to start. Today we will be doing our Dharma service. And so what we do on this day is we will do a 10-minute meditation. After the 10-minute meditation, I'll give a Dharma talk, a short Dharma talk. And then we'll open up for questions and comments, as Master Quan Tri likes to say, emotional outbursts. All right. But first then, let's talk about instructions. What do we do for meditation, especially if you've never meditated before? If you have meditated before, then just continue with whatever practice you are used to using. If you have not meditated before, then there are 3 techniques, simple techniques that that we teach here. Some of them based on very ancient techniques that have been around for more than 3,000 years. And the first one, which is probably one of the oldest, is to simply focus on the breath. How the breath feels as it enters your body, and how does it feel as it exits the body. And simply focus on the sensations, the act of breathing. The benefit of having a meditation practice that is based on breathing as opposed to incense or music or Headspace or Calm app or anything else is that you take the breath with you wherever you go. Those other things are helpful. They should be aids or tools, but the base, the foundation of your meditation practice should be something you carry with you everywhere, and the breath just happens to be one of those things. So focus on the sensation of breathing. The second method is to simply count the breaths. Count up to 10, and when you finish with 10, start over with 1. And if you lose count, then you start over again with 1. The third method is to use a gatha or a mantra, a word or phrase that you repeat over and over again. If you can synchronize it to your breath, even better. And so you synchronize it. One that I often suggest is saying to yourself in your mind silently, breathing in, I calm my mind. Breathing out, I smile. And as you breathe out, you give it like a little half smile on your face. Inevitably, distractions will arise, thoughts will arise, emotions may arise, boredom may arise. And the practice of meditation is being able to re-engage with the breath after those things distract you. So if you start thinking about, oh, today I did this, or I can't believe she said that, or he did that, then just when it's the moment you catch yourself doing that, refocus on the breath. That's the practice. That's the strength training. That effort that you make to catch yourself distracted and bring yourself back to the present moment is where the building and the growth of your meditation practice occurs. So catch yourself and bring it back. Focus on the breath. It can also be helpful to label. Master Quantri talked about that during Sunday service, and what he was focused on primarily was, as things arise, you simply label it. Oh, thought, emotion, sound, right? And that's it. You don't give it any judgment. You don't grasp the thought and cultivate it further. You simply label it and just let it be there. And what happens is, very often the thought, the emotion goes away on its own, or the sound ends and you're back to quiet. Another technique that can be very helpful: consider any sound that distracts you to be equal to the bell. And the bell, when you hear the bell, you feel like, oh, it's time to meditate. So anytime you hear a noise, it is saying, hey, pay attention to your breath. And so now you've incorporated a potential distractor and made it into a tool that helps you focus on the breath. The phone rings, focus on the breath. Someone coughs, that's the bell saying focus on the breath. All right? Any sound, focus on the breath. When you sit, you want to sit in a position where you can be comfortable long enough to be comfortable to do the meditation, but not so comfortable that you fall asleep. And so slouching too much becomes easier to fall asleep. But too tight and too rigid, and it's going to just start hurting. And you're going to be focusing too much on the position as opposed to your breath. So someplace, some halfway where you're comfortable. Good. So we'll do breathing meditation for 10 minutes. Then I'll give the Dharma talk, and then we'll have our discussion. So get in a comfortable position. Take a few deep breaths. And we will begin. So today we're going to discuss the first noble truth. I briefly already introduced the four noble truths, which is sort of the foundation of Buddhism. You don't get much Buddhism 101 than this. Like, this is the foundational teachings. And these teachings were so important, or the Buddha felt that these teachings were so important, that every teaching over the next 30 to 40 years of his life after enlightenment were just an extension of this one teaching of the Four Noble Truths. And the Four Noble Truths, a really great way to think about the Four Noble Truths is the treatment from a medical doctor. In fact, the Buddha is often associated with being a doctor. The idea is in the Four Noble Truths that the first Noble Truth is a diagnosis. The second Noble Truth is the Buddha saying what is the cause of the illness that he diagnosed. The third Noble Truth is sort of saying, hey, there's a way out of this if you want it. And the Four Noble Truth then is the prescription and medication for the initial diagnosis. So today we're going to focus on the diagnosis. And I'm going to try to focus on just the first Noble Truth, but it's very hard not to bleed into the other Four Noble Truths. But that's okay. The first Noble Truth is, in life, there is dukkha. Now, we usually use the word suffering, but the word suffering is limited. It's not the best translation for the word dukkha. Dukkha includes not only suffering, but stress, discomfort, unease, dissatisfaction, craving, longing, and the list goes on and on. The idea is that dukkha is that which takes us out of balance, that which takes us out of peace, the turbulence in our life. And so whenever you hear someone discussing or using the word suffering within the context of Buddhism, don't get stuck on just the meaning of suffering. Remember that anytime the word suffering is used in Buddhism, they are talking about dukkha. And dukkha is so much more. That dissatisfaction, feeling like there has to be more out of life, that's dukkha. The craving for that dessert, that's dukkha. So anything that kind of takes you out of that balance, out of peace, the unpeace, that's dukkha. Now the first noble truth is there is suffering, there is dukkha. Now I want to read to you one translation of the teaching directly from the Buddha. Now this, monks, this is the noble truth of dukkha. Birth is dukkha, aging is dukkha, death is dukkha, sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress and despair are dukkha. Associations with the unbeloved is dukkha. Separation from the loved is dukkha. Not getting what you wanted is dukkha. In short, the 5 clinging aggregates are stressful. Let me explain that last line a bit. The 5 clinging aggregates are stressful. The Skandas, the aggregates, the 5 aggregates, is this idea from Buddhism that each of us are made up of these 5 things. Okay? It's kind of like when the Greek philosophers would say everything in the world is made up of 4 elements. Fire, water, air, earth. Right? But Buddhism has the 5 skandhas. These are the 5 things that you're made up of. I'm not going to focus too much on what the labels are, but in general, the idea is that how you're constructed is dukkha. What that means is that you are inherently created with suffering, to suffer. You're going to age. You're going to die. You're going to get sick. That's inherent in the nature, in your nature, in how you were created. But the first noble truth is there is dukkha. Not in your life there's dukkha. Not that life is dukkha. Just there is dukkha. Statement of fact. It's not. It's simply how this universe is. This universe creates and it destroys. This earth that we're on right now has changed from a primarily carbon dioxide atmosphere to an oxygen-based atmosphere. And in the process, 90% of life was destroyed. The first great extinction. We have evidence of that. And it wasn't personal. It's just how the earth was. It's how the creatures at that time were. And it created suffering. It's inherent in how the universe unfolds. It's not personal. The earth wasn't out to get 90% of the creatures back then. The earth was just the earth. The first noble truth is your life is suffering. It's just there is suffering. And there's an important distinction. One of the things that creates so much suffering is that when we make it personal. When we say, I am depressed. Hi, depressed, I'm Gustavo. That's why I was thinking about his joke. I am anxious. Hi, anxious, I'm Gustavo. I am sad. I am lonely. I'm angry. When we make it personal, we suffer more. Period. So what are we supposed to do? This is where I bleed into the other noble truths. But I want to I don't want to leave you thinking, just don't make it personal. What does that mean? Don't make it personal. It means changing the way you think so that when you are depressed, you recognize, one, that's how you were created. It's part of the 5 aggregates. It's part of how you were constructed. That if the conditions are right, you will experience depression. When the conditions are right, you will experience anxiety. It's not that you become depressed or you become anxiety. You experience depression. You experience anxiety. I am experiencing or I feel loneliness, not I am lonely. I feel angry, not I am angry. And it's simple. I know, it sounds like, well, what is changing that going to do? What it does is it creates a distance and it's recognizing that there is a space, however small, between the feelings and the conditions that made those feelings arise and the Buddha within you, the authentic you. The authentic you is not depression. You are not your depression. You are not your anxiety or your anger or your loneliness. You are more than that. You are a Buddha to be. So when you get into the mindset of, I am not my suffering, it makes ever small room for the possibility that I am more than my suffering. That I can transcend my suffering, that I can be beyond my suffering. In life, there is dukkha. It's more than just personal. So right now, a lot of the examples I've given is I. But again, there is dukkha. It didn't say you have dukkha. The world is constructed in such a way that there will be suffering. And so your desire for there not to be a war in Ukraine, for there not to be drugs in the streets, for there not to whatever, is a denial of there is dukkha. It is built into our universe. Notice also, it's not life is dukkha. The Buddha did not say that all of the universe is dukkha. So in this world, there is also happiness. There's also joy. There's also peace. There's also love and compassion. It's just that the Buddha, at least this Buddha, and so according to some traditions, there have been infinite number of Buddhas. But the Buddha that we had in this universe decided to focus on there is suffering. And that's the teachings that this Buddha decided to stick with. But it does not deny all the other realities of this universe. But boy, that suffering kind of sticks with you. And so that's why the Buddha decided to stick with that for his teachings in this incarnation. In life, there is dukkha. I once had a teacher describe it this way. You are a shit monster in a toilet full of shit. Old Vietnamese monk told me this. I was like, what the? And then I sat with it. Well, not kidding. I sat with the idea. I am a shit monster. So I have dukkha within me. And I am in a shitty world. And when you can realize that, then you want to be out of it. And that's what drives you to the next noble truth, and the next noble truth, and the next one. I don't want to be a shit monster anymore in a shitty toilet bowl. I want to transcend that. I want something better for myself. The Buddha didn't come in, wave his hand, and make everything all right. Jesus didn't come in, stretch out his arms, and make everything all right. Muhammad didn't come in and make everything all right. Moses didn't. Abraham didn't. All of these religious figures have not come and saved and changed the world so that we have world peace. And yet, there was something about them. They transcended. They went beyond. And so that's what's the calling. How are you going to go beyond? How are you going to transcend this shitty toilet bowl of life? And if you can make it a little less shitty, fantastic. But your main goal is to become awakened, to transcend, to be going beyond. And that's what the First Noble Truth calls us to do. Recognize that there is dukkha. Period. In you, in me, in the world. What are we going to do about it? That's where the next Noble Truth comes in. In the next Noble Truth then, which we'll talk about in a month, so the next first Tuesday of November, the Buddha will discuss what is the source of the suffering. Where does it come from? What's the cause of the illness? And I so want to start talking about it right now, but Let's focus on the First Noble Truth. All right. I'll stop there. And just sort of open it up to questions, comments, observations, anything you want to sort of bring up.
I think our language traps us sometimes.
Yes.
Because we're always just saying, I am this, I am that. Right? So when you say I am something, then you're identifying with it, you're losing your own identity, and it's whatever this other event is going on, right? So,
even though there is dukkha, there's also hope. And so, can you talk about that?
That's on December. That's the third noble truth.
Okay.
So the third noble truth is the hopeful message.
Okay.
So you're not stuck
So
in this toilet bowl of life.
shitty toilet.
Yeah, you're not stuck here. There's a way out, is basically what the Buddha is saying in the third noble truth. There's a way out.
I've noticed in some other languages, especially like European, you tend to hear there is anger. So they're not just so automatically identified with it. It's interesting to me, or they say I have anger, or there is anger, which is a little bit more better than saying I am anger, because you're not the anger.
I was just wondering, like, why is there dukkha? Why is there
Why is there dukkha?
Yeah, why is there like this? There has to be some sort of chemical or something, like maybe oxygen on this earth causes
You're
that.
not gonna like the answer.
Well, I know the karma and all that, but that's
The Buddha was asked that question, not that exact question, but he was asked that question.
yeah. Why is there dukkha?
And the answer was wrong question. And it's I don't like the answer either, but that's the answer he gave.
Well, I know, but there has to be some reason.
So when we get stuck on this is my opinion now.
Yeah.
When we get stuck on why is there dukkha? Is there meaning to life? Is there a God? All these questions that people much smarter than me have tackled with and have not come up with a good answer. When we spend too much time on those questions, we take away time from the actions that we can do now to get out of the toilet bowl.
Just you, but it will help the whole generations if we could find out.
If you can find out,
Yeah.
go for it.
Surely so.
Yes. So if you want to struggle with those questions, go for it. And then when you finally get tired of banging your head against the wall, then you'll be ready to focus on the now.
So,
I'm not saying there's no point to pondering
it's
those
like
questions.
it's a diagnosis, so we have to kind of like we know there's a dukkha, that's a universal
Yeah.
truth.
So he does talk about the cause of dukkha, not the why, but what causes it, and that's the second noble truth.
Yeah.
So, and then, these other questions, they have their role too. So I'm not saying never ask those questions. Well, all I warn against is spending too much time on these questions that don't really have an answer. At least no one, if you think you can get the answer, go for it. And if you find it, please let me know.
I guess it's like what you were saying about it being a diagnosis. So you go to the doctor and they say you have cancer. There's a difference between, well, doctor, why is there cancer in the world, as opposed to what caused cancer?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really good
In
point.
my case, what changes in my
Yeah,
body
like, why
allow
is there
cancer
cancer
to
in the
arise? Yeah.
Why is there anything?
Yeah.
But what caused it? So that, is it something that I did? Is it my lifestyle? Whatever.
Yeah, great point. It reminds me of the story of the arrow and A guy who got stuck with the arrow and he wanted to know what kind of wood and what kind of feather it was, what bird was his feather. Just take the damn arrow out.
Yeah.
Right, stop
Right.
myself.
If you want to analyze the arrow afterwards, great. But for right now, just get the arrow out.
And there's another good story about arrows. It's called the double arrow. So the first arrow that flies at you is the original suffering. And then the second arrow that hits you is what you do after you get the first arrow, right? So you spend probably more time suffering that second arrow than dealing with the first arrow, right? So I thought it was interesting. He said, if you're in a wood and an arrow's flying at you, there's another one right behind it, and you can't, you can't stop what that first arrow's going to do, but you might be able to
Duck for the second.
duck or have, maybe you can avoid having that second arrow come at you because of what you realize in the moment. So
We're going to talk more about that, how we amplify our suffering. And that's part of the second noble truth. Jerry, you had a question or a comment?
Oh, I was going to just say that I thought that maybe, because I wrestled with that question too of why there is suffering, why there's evil, why me, why this, why
Yes.
that, everything. And I think part of the obsession for me in focusing on that question is because maybe part of me feels that if I can somehow identify the source of it, then I can exercise it and be rid of it. And I don't think that that's true, but I guess the hope is there. I've kind of satisfied myself with the answer that the closest I can get to an answer to that question for myself is that there's suffering because there is hope. Like you need the dark in order to have the light, and that's as close as I can kind of come to like some sort of satisfactory answer. And it doesn't cover it, but it's something to kind of think about, I guess. So yeah.
To add to your message of hope, if Buddhism is right, then we don't need to know the source in order to get out of the suffering, to end it.
Yeah.
And so, why look that way if the answer is over this way? It's kind of the sort of thing. If you want to spend time on those questions, just don't waste too much time. Because there is another answer over here that seems to work and seems to have worked for a lot of people in history. The Buddhas that have been around.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I don't exactly know where I'm going quite with this, but like you drew a distinction of there is suffering versus like there is in your life and life is suffering. Like you drew a distinction between those two. So it made me think of dodgeball. Like if you're in the game, there's gonna be some balls chucked at you. Like that's the game, right? But then I'm like, so but you didn't say they're actually gonna be thrown at you. They might be, but is the goal to avoid getting hit? But then like avoidance is suffering and all that, right? I don't know where I'm going with this. That's it. That's it, actually.
That's good. That means you're struggling with that. And again, that's where you want to be. You want to be struggling with this. If you leave here thinking you have the answer because I gave it to you, you're wrong. I can already tell you you're wrong. You want to leave here struggling. What does that mean for me? What does that mean for us? Okay? So that's going to be your sort of sign that you're doing it right, is if you're struggling. But if you leave here with, I know what to do now, alrighty, good luck. See you next week, or 2 weeks.
What came in my mind when you spoke about Dukkha is I read something in a mindfulness book. There are two types of suffering related to substance use, for example, the pain of addiction and the pain of abstinence. So the problem is you have the pain of abstinence, but when you have the pain of addiction, you also add the suffering. Because it makes your life miserable, finances miserable, relationship miserable, and your physical health miserable. So yes, it's a deprivation from that high of in abstinence, but when you have the pain of addiction, it's more suffering. Now regarding with the cause, when we know that we sometimes actually know the cause of suffering, but also we keep doing what makes us suffer. So for example, like diabetes, how many people are keep eating cheesecake when they absolutely know that the cheesecake will give them like diabetes and hypoglycemic, blood sugar that high. So even many times, or most of the time, we know the cause of suffering, we just keep doing it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and I have another thought about why not, actually? Who says that we don't have to suffer at the end of the day?
Well, like one thing Jerry said near the end is that he had a sense that there's suffering or dukkha wouldn't exist unless there was some
Yeah.
purpose for it, right?
No purpose.
And if you remember last week, 2 weeks ago in our reading, Thich Nhat Hanh, he was talking about how we use that suffering. Because once we understand that it is not us, that it's just causes and conditions, that our own minds play a role in creating, right? That we reflect on that suffering. If we don't suffer, it's like you said, how can we know joy if we don't know what pain is, right? How can we be happy if we don't know what sadness is? But I just keep coming back to that beautiful phrase, the middle way. The Buddha will always say it's the middle way. So we don't live in one extreme or the other. Please.
I think this whole conversation is kind of like revolving around the acknowledgement of suffering, like just knowing that it exists. But as the conversation continues, it makes me feel kind of sad and hopeless to think, well, if I'm in the middle of the dodgeball game and I can kind of get out of it or can find a way to ease it, that dodgeball game is still happening. And I know about it. That war is still happening. There's still people dying. And I know of it. So it almost seems sad and borderline cynical to be like, I know that it's there. And I know that I can't do anything, so why should I intercept?
I know that it's there.
And see, I will interrupt you because we talked about no self. And that is the exact same thing. If the rest of the world is suffering, you will continue to suffer. So somebody have to find what is causing the suffering has to be eliminated completely.
Yeah.
Then only they'll be happy. I mean, you can say, okay, you're happy, then you get attached to that. That causes more suffering. Or you're joyful, like you were saying. That is attachment. And when you are attached to joy or luxury or anything like that, money, then there will be suffering.
So the part that I disagree with is, I agree there is suffering, there is war. Don't disagree with there's nothing I can do about it. Because that goes against the second noble truth. And
Which I
the
don't
third
know
one
about.
and the fourth, which tell us what we can do. And so we'll get there. And so keep coming back. Jerry, you had another comment.
Well, just earlier today, I was thinking about the stories that we tell just throughout our history as humans, really, and they're just filled with horrors and atrocities and this sort of fascination with the dark side of human nature. When you look at even the movies that we see and the shows,
Halloween.
Yeah, and I think that it's part of that acknowledgement that there is suffering, there is dukkha, and but once you acknowledge that, then you're in a proper place to be able to actually do some effective strategy in
Very
against
good.
it.
Very good. Because the first part is always, hi, I'm Alex, and I'm suffering. Well, I have suffering. All right? So you have to acknowledge that the suffering is there before you can do anything about it. And that's what the First Noble Truth is telling us to do, is to understand more deeply suffering. That suffering is inherent in this universe. I don't fully agree about suffering having a purpose or meaning, but I sometimes think that we're just looking at the same thing from different perspectives.
Perhaps.
You know, so it might be that we're both right and wrong. For me, it's like I have this crap, and I'm going to pile this crap up, and I'm going to use it to step up over the lid of the lip of the toilet bowl. So it doesn't have any inherent meaning. It's just a tool that I'm going to use to rise above the suffering.
Well, how about this? He said we should not run away from our suffering. We should not disregard it. We need to, if it's there, and be real about it, and don't push it away. So maybe that's a better way to say it. Because it's acceptance, right? We just learn to accept whatever is at that moment.
I have a question. So last week, we just, or no, 2 weeks ago, that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional.
Second arrow.
Yet here we are saying, like, it exists, like that is the first truth, right? Like, so it exists, but we choose if we indulge in the suffering.
Yeah.
And whether we allow it to continue.
We in the same analogy of the diabetic, we are choosing to continue in the acts and behaviors that are at the base of our suffering. But there is hope in that message, because it means that if you're the cause of it, that means you're also the answer.
Yes.
But that's jumping ahead to the other noble truths. First, you must understand the nature of dukkha. You must be aware of dukkha, that it's there, that it's inherent, that it's the dodgeball of life, that it's the wars going on around us. Dukkha is there, and that dukkha was inherent before the human race even existed. Creatures before, the prehistoric creatures that are extinct now, they suffered dukkha, because it's inherent in the universe.
But is dukkha everything? Or
No.
almost everything? Because you had said last time we did this that Siddhartha suffered when he was an extravagant prince. So he was probably as happy as could be.
Yep.
Still suffered, still had that dukkha. I would very much assume when he left his family and became an ascetic, he suffered as well. And then it was only upon meditating that he realized that he doesn't need it anymore. So suffering is in it, at least the way I'm seeing it, it's pretty much anything, happiness, sadness, a full stomach, and a hungry stomach. It's practically everything with the exception, the possible exception of just being nonchalant about things.
So, in my opinion, because I'm not enlightened. So everyone, there's no halo here. Remember that, okay? It's just opinion. There is dukkha, but it didn't say everything is dukkha. So we must avoid the idea that dukkha is everything or everywhere. It's just that dukkha is prevalent. We're shit monsters in the shitty toilet bowl. It's everywhere. So it's prevalent. There is dukkha. Everything is not dukkha. What was the other thing you mentioned? Yes, I think the other thing, this was important. Abel reached another level of understanding that takes a little longer for people to realize. Happiness is a form of suffering. You're like, what? What are you smoking, Alex?
Because we don't want it to end.
There you go.
We don't want it to end.
Okay.
We want that
I'm
good
happy,
feeling to last
and
forever.
the crash comes right after.
Full stomach. Great
Full
meal.
stomach. Damn it, I'm fat.
Oh yeah, or I'm not feeling so good.
Yeah, I'm feeling nauseous.
I had something that I wanted to add, and forgive me guys if this is a little too much information, but one of the reasons, the things that led me here to taking this class was that, and something that she had, it reminded me of this, is abstinence created dukkha for me. I had taken a vow of celibacy for 3 years, made a decision to break that vow, and having a connection with a male caused this like addictive feeling to happen between me and him, and that also created dukkha. And so I was like, oh my gosh, like being abstinent and refraining from what I thought would ameliorate suffering actually still caused suffering. And then when I went to the other side, I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm still experiencing this, you know? And one of the things that I have learned is like acceptance is the answer to all of my problems. So I was like, okay, so I'm accepting that dukkha exists. I feel like I'm the problem right now. And I feel like if I can admit this, there's a solution, but I don't know what it is.
All I got are clues. And so I don't know what it is either. And so everyone here has different clues, which is why we have these discussions in hopes that we can borrow from each other's wisdom and experience. And that's part of being human, is trying to figure out, well, abstaining or giving in, both of them created dukkha, so what am I supposed to do? Full stomach or empty stomach, I'm suffering, so what am I supposed to do? Like, well, gosh, who can I blame for this shitty world?
Yeah. For me, I just think, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Acceptance is part of it, but also accepting that I can do something about it, which is what happens when we kind of forget when we use the word acceptance. Accept that that's how it is. And we feel like, just forget it, just do whatever. I'm going to be passive and I'll do nothing. It's not that sort of acceptance. It's acceptance that the world is dukkha, and it's acceptance that inherent in me is the ability to get out of dukkha.
And you said, I'm not the problem, actually you are not the problem,
Yes.
the solution, your
I
choices.
didn't mean, that's a wrong choice of words.
The choices, right? Not identify with the problem because you are not.
Right.
Up to it.
See, like sometimes whenever I share things out loud, sometimes I think to myself, so when I speak, sometimes like old programming comes through and I have to correct myself often. But like acceptance for me isn't saying I give up or that's it. Like for me it's like, okay, there's action steps that can be taken. So one of the reasons why I came here is I was like just trying to learn wisdom from other people that have walked this path and taken steps, that have taken steps more than I have, maybe.
Or in different ways.
Yeah.
Just different steps. You've taken your own great steps.
Yeah.
So.
Yes, sir.
So, when you were talking about like the recognition of, I don't know what I'm saying, but the recognition of like the suffering, right? It's funny because like I've never meditated before, and so it was the first time I meditated like in this setting like this.
Congratulations.
Yeah. and I couldn't help but to, I don't usually sit like this, and so to try to meditate, I was
Having pain.
having a lot of pain. Discomfort.
Welcome
to
So
I couldn't
meditation
help but to
suffering.
recognize, like, when you were saying how it's important to recognize these things that are happening outside of the recognition of your breathing, to try to meditate, like, it kind of reminded me of how similar the process is to kind of recognizing the suffering in your life and like coming back, but like the work that it takes to like kind of focus on your breathing again and kind of center yourself. And so like I didn't realize how similar that was to that, I feel. So I just wanted to make a comment on that.
And thank you for speaking up, because you bring up another good point that I wish I had talked about. When you mentioned your experience of meditating like this for the first time, everyone laughed, not because they were laughing at you, but because they recognized that same suffering in their first time of meditation.
Like,
Everyone was like, I've been there, yes!
And it doesn't mean you have to be sitting on a cushion to meditate.
Yeah.
But that's the other element
But the
of
pain and the
suffering.
suffering kind of like, we're one and the same.
It came
And the
about-
pain and the suffering united us, even very briefly, with the common experience of, yeah, I remember, or I still suffer that. So that's one of the other benefits or the tools of suffering, is that suffering can be very unifying. There's war in Ukraine, so what happens? All the nations arise and they start helping Ukraine out. Because we don't ever want that to happen to anyone else. We're unified through that suffering. So that's the other benefit of dukkha.
I don't know if you guys. Oh, go ahead, Leon.
Just gonna say, you're gonna love the Noble Eightfold Path, because that's the meat. That's where we get to addressing every one of these things.
What I was gonna say is, I don't know if you guys have ever experienced this, but sometimes when things really happen that are like super exciting in life, and then things are like super depressing, like for me, there's always I don't know, I just feel like lately there's just been a lot of extremes, like really highs, and then like really low lows, and then at the end of the day, I'm just like, exhausted. Even if it was just like a really like what I would call an amazing happy day, like at the end of the day I'm just drained, or if it was a really depressing day or whatever, then I'm just like, So I just feel the need to be more just like equal, like having equal feelings.
Like Leon was saying, maybe the middle.
Yeah, like
Not
the middle
extremes.
path. Like there has to be a different way, like not just so extreme from one extreme to the next, because obviously like that high and that low are not working. So it's like, where's that middle area?
So I'm not happy you're going through this roller coaster of emotions, but I'm very happy that you're using this roller coaster of emotions to say there has to be a better way.
Yes.
That's what dukkha, there is dukkha, the first noble truth is trying to tell us. Recognize the roller coaster of your life right now. Recognize the war. Recognize the shit show that is your life. And recognize, I want better than this. It takes time, it takes work, it takes practice. And as of yet, no one in this room has become Buddhas. So no one in this room has all the answers. But as you can see, when we share like this, when we engage in conversations with other fellow sufferers, we catch little nuggets of wisdom that we can then adapt. We learn different ways of seeing it, different possible ways of thinking about it. While I may not think of meaning as suffering as having meaning, using that term, then I should consider that, because that's another valid perspective. And so he doesn't have the full truth, I don't have the full truth, but maybe together, in acknowledging that there are different perspectives, we can get at what the underlying truth is. And we share this together.
And your son did a great job of it. Really does come back to that joke.
I'll let him know.
Yeah.
So yes, so it is time.
Probably it's time to wind up and let these folks have their evening.
So continue to struggle with this. Continue to ask, why must I suffer this way? Is there something better? In 2 weeks, we'll have a parable. We're going to try and find a parable that will kind of help us explore these ideas even further. In the month, so the next first Tuesday of the month, I will then talk about the causes of suffering, which is very much related to abstaining and addiction. All right, and that's another way, those are other words for some other words that Buddha used, attachment and aversion. And so we'll talk about those things then in November, the first Tuesday of November. And we will catch, and together we'll learn more nuggets of wisdom that will help us. And that's the goal. That's the beauty of community. We get to see different perspectives, to question our own, and to maybe borrow from each other's wisdom. So I invite you to come in 2 weeks for the parable. I invite you to come again for the first Tuesday in November for a continuation of the Noble Truth. For those of you watching, come on over. All right, let's go ahead and share the merit, and then we'll ring the bell. May any merit we may have accrued by sharing the Dharma here tonight bring us and others health, happiness, safety, and peace. Have a great week, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. I always wait here to find why can't this like professional man with a family and full-time job do this every Tuesday? God, come on, like for
Gotta
free.
have y'all wanting for more.
That's what I'm like, I'm suffering. A lot more.
Yeah, what you said, it gave me a lot to think about.
I'm here with this here. Good to see you guys again.
For the first time.
Yeah.
We Westerners, we just don't.
Yeah,
We live in chairs. It doesn't need you. Listen, anytime you come in, hope we'll see you soon. In 2 weeks, we'll have a parable. First, in November, we'll get back to the same.
As always, thank you for coming, Jerry.
Thank
It's
you.
always a great time.
You know
Thank you
what?
for coming.
I think your son's joke is gonna be in my head. Because I was like, every time they were saying, I was like, yeah, I'm not hungry on this side. I'm not hungry on this side.